live stream on.
Last time I requested for there to be plugs of digital laptops.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so welcome to the Licensing and Public Protection Committee, colleagues, and can I wish you all the best for 2003, and thank you for your support over the last year, particularly those of us who've been obviously involved in the subcommittees, whereas, you know, it's always important to do substitutions and stuff like that. So thank you very much for your commitment, everyone. Okay, item 1, I advise the meeting to note that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded they must declare all relevant pecuniary and other registrable interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. And apologies, we have apologies from Councillor Wagg, or any more apologies? Yes, Councillor Wagg, we've got, yes, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for those. Okay, minutes 16th of November 2022. These are correct record. Are there any amendments? If not, can we agree those? Agreed. Thank you. So the first item is review of licensing and public protection fees and charges. A report of, I think Mark Croxton is going to lead on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an annual report that we bring to the committee to review the fees and charges across the whole of the service. And the main report at section 2.1 to 2.5, it actually indicates the areas that are covered by the report. In fact, you could go on a little bit further than that. What I propose, Chair, is if we can take each section and take questions for each section or approve the fees, then that would be the easiest way. So I'll do the introductions, and then if there are any questions, I'll give them to them or refer them to the relevant committee service. And then if you could take the recommendation to approve, and I'll indicate to get through those stages.
Okay. So
the first section of the report, we've been asked to review the charges and to reduce the charges where applicable at the rate of 5%. So the first section is in Appendix 1, and that's the review of the trading standards charges. The next 3 or 4 pages. I'm not proposing to go through any of the ones, but if anybody wants to ask any questions, either myself or Tony can go and see that.
Anything on Appendix 1 then, colleagues? No?
Chair, if you could then move 2.1, which if you agree that.
Are you okay to agree? Do we agree those charges then? Agreed. Thank you.
And then
Appendix 2.
Actually, the next appendix is that for environmental health. Again, it's the same. We've undertaken to do that charges, and we've also looked at where we can do an increase for what we haven't made any money or charged for that service. We've tried to hold it stable. All of the details in that appendix. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer that.
That runs to page 28, doesn't it?
It stands for 13, Chair. It's the environmental health ones, and then
okay. I presume everybody's got the same pagination as me because I've got a hard copy here. So that
3.2 is just the environmental health, not the animal welfare.
Oh, not the animal welfare. Okay. So not the new licenses bit. Okay. So the environmental health charges, any points on those? If not, can we agree those? Agreed. Okay, thanks. So animal welfare.
The next appendix is the animal welfare. This also includes licensing, and we have to break out the charges as to how much it costs to come from, as well as how much it costs in the licensing. I can confirm that has been done. Sorry.
Um,
I'm sorry. I've just been asked to speak up, sorry. The lead officer has also broken out the charges as to the cost of the licence as well as the officer time. It's full cost recovery. So again, is there any questions on that?
anything on that? They're all stated down there. No? Okay, can we agree those charges? Okay.
Appendix 2 now, Chair, is the fixed penalty tariffs. Predominantly, all of the fixed penalty tariffs are either set at the maximum or they are set by statute. So committee could only lower the charge today. They couldn't increase any of the charges. So that's a historical thing. But there is questions there as to whether people would like to, councillors would like to change any of the charges. As I say, the majority are set at the maximum. The end column is the fixed penalty. The last one column indicates the range. So for the first one, it indicates that there's a range between £65 and £150. We again recommend that we have no discount for early payments. When we used to have discounts for early payments, we had terrible trouble with people paying late and paying the earlier amount. They wouldn't pay the full amount. And then we had problems at court about whether or not the fixed penalty had been paid or not paid. So it was abused so badly. We recommended some time ago not to use the discount for early payment, but that is still available if we wish to discuss that. So again, Chair, I'll just pause there for questions.
What is the domestic duty of care fixed penalty notice about?
So this is enforced by our Waste Enforcement Unit, and this is where you must take reasonable steps to ensure that people that are offering the service to take waste from your home are registered waste carriers. So if somebody knocks your door and says it's £150 for the skip, and then someone else says, I'll do it for £30, the argument is that you would reasonably be expected to know that the £30 isn't covering all the cost, and that's where they would issue the fixed penalty. So where there is a very obvious underpayment, which is almost certainly going to lead to fly tipping or something else.
So the person using that dodgy service could be subject to a penalty,
So
not just the person running the dodgy service.
No, the person running the dodgy service committing a separate offence. But if I chose to use that £30 one instead of the 150, and other people were quoting 165 and 155, then it's reasonable to say that I knew that that £30 wasn't lawful.
Okay.
And therefore, I could be subject to it.
Chair, can I just interject here in relation to this, because we all know that there is a big fighting problem, bigger in some wards and others certainly more direct again. Is there any plans to do any awareness work around this? Because Facebook, all local notice boards in every community are filled with adverts saying we will take the waste, but it's where we all, on an objective test, know X is a ludicrously ridiculous amount. But people in the general public, especially the cost of living crisis, are attracted to it without realising the consequences. So whether there's any work we can do in terms of raising awareness, let people know that these adverts are dodgy, they're not genuine, and these are the reasons. That would certainly help, because we are seeing increasingly these people coming to collect waste from people's homes. People think they're genuine, and then they are fly tipping.
Chair, I had a meeting yesterday with Paul Pritchett from the Waste Enforcement Unit regarding some of this and some of the social value to the contract. I can certainly bring that up, and maybe we can feed back to you offline, or to committee offline. But yeah, that's a good point.
Councillor Knowles?
Yes, going on from that, I agree with that, and I think it's also very helpful to know what to do when people have, recently found some waste with an address in it, and I don't know whether that would take not that could be one follow through. How many big penalties for this particular offence have been issued or warning letters? That sort of thing would be useful to know as well.
I think that makes Paul as well.
I'm agreeing with both colleagues. I also think we've got to keep an eye on social media, because there's people putting adverts there, not doing anybody down, but some are genuine, some may not be. Pick it up free and then dump it, and then we have the cost of clearing it.
Yes, I think it's not generally known that people using the service could be subject to a penalty. You might assume that, as I say, the person providing the dodgy service would be, but it's not generally known that that domestic duty of care fixed penalty notice exists. So if we were to broadcast that a bit more, that might help. Yeah.
In my ward, we had rubbish that was being removed by one of these providers and came from Brighton. And the service had been advertised on Checker Trade. So these sites are not checking the providers. There's
dumping ground.
But I think if we've got particular examples, obviously letting
that is
the officers know is the key, isn't it? Yeah. And just on the point about identified waste, I've certainly reported that in my own ward more than once on the basis of finding an address. And I know it is followed up. It's not always possible to prosecute, but we did have one case where we did do a prosecution and we got £6,000, I think, fine against the person. So that was useful. So that sort of evidence is exactly what is needed. Okay. Yes, Councillor Pritchard, yeah.
I mean, just following on for Councillor Donaldson's point, I'm not entirely sure it would be obvious to members of the general public from the cost, particularly if they're on Checker Trade or something like that, you'd think would be reputable. But even if they're not, I don't think in that instance it would be obvious to most people, oh, that's cheap, therefore they must be fly tipping. I don't think that's necessarily an obvious connection a lot of people would necessarily make. And even less any kind of knowledge that they would be fined for therefore going up for not making that so-called obvious assumption. So I think if that's proceeded with, then it, as has been already said, it does need to kind of awareness raising campaigns to say, well, it's actually your responsibility to check it's legit. If it's cheap, and if you're not, you could be liable to a fine, because otherwise, it's not. As I said, I don't think if somebody says cheap, then they won't necessarily associate cheap with illicit straight away. A lot of people would, but not everybody would. And so it's not necessarily obvious. I think doing it needs to be coupled with that awareness raising.
Chair, I think it was probably me being lazy in describing the offence before the fixed penalties are issued. Plus also, with regard to any prosecutions that follow, we still have to follow our enforcement protocol. So we have to make sure that people are aware that it was easy to avoid commissioning the offence. It wasn't inadvertent, etc. So there is a work behind that, but that's under the enforcement protocol rather than the offence. So excuse my laziness.
Okay, thank you for that. Are we happy with the level of the fixed penalty notice tariffs then on page 19? We agree those? Agree. Thanks. So 2D appendix.
This is the pest control fees and charges. Again, we tried to apply a slight increase across the board on those. Excuse me. We tried to apply the 5%, but we also have to make sure that we are competitive. The highlights is we still will be doing domestic rat treatments for free. We're not charging for that. And then the other charges are all in the end column with a slight increase, but it's just making the cost of living line.
Okay, any questions about this? Yes.
Seeking clarification on the mice. Is it free of charge and the entities? What's the difference on those?
So the pest control service is only funded to undertake rat in house, rat in garden treatments. Mice, I can't remember the last time that was done. We're talking probably the late 80s, early 90s, if indeed pest control did it at that point. So it hasn't been funded. What the city does do is through the neighbourhood offices, it does provide some free mouse poison, but by and large it's down to residents to treat. The rats are free of charge at that point of service for mice. It will be a charge for service.
The issue with the rat infestation is that that's a real public health threat, isn't it, relative to these are more like a nuisance. Or that's a bit of a layman's analysis, I know, but is that a reasonable assumption?
It is easier to treat for mice than it is for rats.
Yeah.
The key thing behind treating for mice is there was a way in which they came into the property if it's a domestic situation. You do need to do that pest proofing. Otherwise, you will treat and you will eradicate what's in your property, but then further ones will come in because they're coming in for a reason. They're coming in for warmth, food and water, somewhere to live. So you also need to do that pest proofing. And I think historically, this is way before my time when I was in the HM. I think historically the problem was we were treating for mice, but there was no pest proofing done, so you just ended up with infestations. Where there are huge infestations, we still have the ability to serve notice and eradicate. So we have had a situation where there was a row of houses that were completely infested. It didn't matter what one did, they all had to do it. So what we did is we served notice on all of them and then we eradicated it. But then the cost of that was then recharged to each.
Yeah, that's the problem that I'm getting in, especially low-rise blocks with about 6 flats. Treat one and then it comes back because.
So we will deal with that problem. If it's done with the health incident, which is coming back to your point, 1 or 2 are a nuisance, but if it becomes a massive public health nuisance, we then go back to our statutory powers, which are to serve notice and require.
Councillor Pritchard.
I mean, I've had queries from residents who probably wouldn't necessarily see all the others as just a nuisance rather than a public health thing. You know, for example, the cockroaches or the bed bugs or the fleas in particular. And I have, when I've been kind of trying to support residents and giving them advice on these when I get these queries, that there has been ways that other local authorities do more free pest control than Birmingham does. Whereas like literally everything that you can charge for here is being charged for. So I suppose my question is, how are the other local authorities managing it? And is there any way that Birmingham could consider, if not for this year, for future years, doing something a bit different? Because obviously that's quite a lot of money if you're not on much, cost of living. And, and you see just across the board of the local authorities is giving their residents the cost for free.
Yes, there are some local authorities, in particular the rural authorities, who don't offer any form of pest control service. They just rely on the statutory powers of people to do it all step. And at that point, that's very costly. Coming back to your point, if the council wanted us to treat for cockroaches, pickles, etc., then we would need more pest officers and it can't be funded.
And is it the case that with rat infestations, there is a duty to report those?
Legally, there's a duty to report rodent infestations. So that under the Prevention of Damage by Pests Act, that's where the duty falls. And the other duty is that the landowner is required to take steps to eradicate their land of rats and mice. And there's a further duty on the council to eradicate its own land, as well as take action to cause others to do so. So that's where the statutory duty is. That's in the Prevention of Damage by Pests Act, but it's not. That's 1949, some years ago.
Yes.
The mice is free of charge mice treatment. It says poison offered at neighbourhood offices. We don't have a neighbourhood office in our ward. Could we be supplied with a list of offices where it's available for the to pick this up?
Yes, you can supply a list of the neighbourhood offices. It's just those ones that are open. So I think it's 3 or 4 now, whereas it used to be 1 in every constituency, if I recall, if not slightly higher. But I'll ask Lisa to send you a list.
Councillor Knowles?
That will be helpful because I wonder how many reports you get of rats actually turn out to be mice. Does that happen again?
Yes, so the question is how many of the rats are reported as mice, and we do everything we can to try some out because it's not the same poison, so you can't use rat poison to treat mice. And obviously, if the officer goes, it's an aborted visit, which means that someone else didn't get the treatment, so it is how it.
So exactly, but
we
I
do
can understand why people might do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're able to help them deal with it if it's mice, then we might not get so many people day up.
Yeah, at the time that the decision was made, not to continue to the mice far outplayed the number of rat treatments that we probably 3 or 4 times as many.
Okay, we've got the commercial figures as well on the next page.
So there is an income target of 860,000 for the pest control team as a whole. Predominantly, they do quite a lot of commercial work, and they also quote for doing quite a lot of clearance work and treating the land thereafter. But they also do supporting building property services, clearing out buildings and making them available for re-letting. Those are the commercial rates. Plus, in addition to that, we will give quotes. And some towns, housing officers and others come back and suggest a slightly lower amount, which you can understand because their budgets are under pressure, but we do have to make that money. But that's indicative of the supervisor on his quoting, and that's how much it costs.
Okay, colleagues, so can we accept the fees on 2D and the commercial? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So appendix 3.
Appendix is the review of the register document. Slightly different here in that there's more statutory amounts that are in there. They're also set slightly further ahead. So for instance, when somebody might want to book a wedding next year, the cost this year will be applied even though it's the year after. So these costs will be viewed and have a bit more of a longer view on their costings. But again, they've been reviewed by Andrea, and these are the proposed charges. Those are the greyed out in the report, are statutory and market charges, so they're set by statute. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Bajaj.
This may be a mistake, or maybe I've misunderstood, but on table 1, if you have an additional room added after the application is approved for the 3-year line, it costs more to have the additional rooms after the application. But for the 6-year one, it costs less to have it added after the application. Now, is that accurate? And if so, why is it the other way around for if it's 6 years as opposed to 3? Surely it would cost more, it should cost more, whatever the time frame is, if you have the extra rooms after the application, because obviously that's a greater admin burden.
I'm hoping maybe the director can assist on that.
No, even I am perplexed. If we could come back to you on that, we'll.
Okay. I suspect it may be just the line of the one around for the 6-year one, but that's why I was trying to query it.
Yeah, but I think it's quite complex, isn't it, from registrars? So we'll ask registrars for the answer. I don't know how we would deal with that in the recommendation to approve.
If we agree, those are stated, but we can always come back if there's some technical issue and readdress it. Come back to the committee.
What we've done previously, where there's been some typos changed, we've just brought an addendum report to the next committee and asked for that change to be adopted. So, given that we're under pressure to get the approval so that we can get it onto the website, which is the biggest problem.
Well, it needs to be clear though, doesn't it, to go if it's going onto the website?
I'll take the specific question so we can speak to Andrew immediately after the after committee.
Yeah.
And then if we do need to bring an addendum, we'll have to bring an addendum report back.
Okay. Well, and if we could have a reply so the committee members can.
I can email the response.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So if we approve those, including the questionable one, we'll revisit that if necessary. Is that okay? Table 1, agreed. Thank you.
It's the appendix, Chair.
Oh, the appendix. The whole of the appendix. Yeah. Any other questions on any of the other charges here? If not,
Sorry, which appendix? You say all the other appendices? Which?
So,
Appendix 3 we're looking at
all
now.
of appendix 3, right? Fine.
It's all of Appendix 3. Yep. And then there are set charges, which are the grey. We can't do anything about those. So can we agree those? Agreed. Thank you. So we're on to Appendix 4.
Appendix 4 is the current, but again, it's most of that, it's just a slight increase on charges where we undertake search fees, so it's 4-week break. It's gone from 52 to 55 pounds.
Okay. Can we agree those? Appendix 4. Agreed. Appendix 5.
And the city code charges are in Appendix 5. There's only a few charges that they make for those in the committee. Again, I can take questions and take back to us.
Anything on that? No? Can we agree those? Agreed. Thank you. Appendix 6, isn't there a typo under 2.2? It says specific lines is under the, and there's a gap. What's that? Under the 2.2 on Appendix 6. Perhaps I've got an earlier draft.
No, it's in there.
What does it say?
It's,
Yeah.
under them.
So what should it say?
It's highways. I'm sorry.
Under the regulations? But
She probably said it should say under the highways, actually.
yeah. Okay. Well, it's not part of the decision. It's just a typo.
Yeah, it's the fact that Kia are appointed to undertake work on behalf of highways.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
The proposal is fortunately in 3.1 and those logistic charges that the highways recover for statutory action and non-statutory action on the highway infrastructure. Again, I can take questions back.
they've not given us a list of the actual charges, have they? Where are they?
They've just said that the fees and charges covered by the report have been reviewed in non-corporate charging public fees are to be increased by 5% to the amount of information.
Well, I suppose that's a reasonable principle. But Councillor Pritchard?
It stands also in there. These are outlined in Appendix 6A, but I can't see an Appendix 6A.
That's a good point.
It's not on the papers,
Through you, Chair, I think the way to resolve this is we'll ask Secretary to bring a separate report here, explaining this, because there should be an Appendix 6A of the report, which is clearly missing, so we'll bring another report.
Yeah, sorry about that. So that's an error with the papers. So we'll have to bring that report back. We'll do that.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
Okay. I think that's all of those anyway, other than the ones we need to bring back as we've just referred. Okay. Nothing else, Mark, from you there?
No, that's
No.
that's the report. Thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you. So we've approved that report. So thank you very much. Okay, street trading consent fees and charges.
Thank you, Chair.
Director's going to talk to them.
Thank you. As members will know, street trading was reviewed as a whole back in 2020 when we introduced our new corporate policy. We based the original street trading fees and charges on forecast budgetary expenditure and income. We've now had a moment to reflect on the current budget, and as such, the proposed fee showed in Appendix 1 of the report, taking into account deficit that has been accrued over the last 2 years of the scheme coming under the licensing team, and hence there are proposed fees here that ensure that that deficit is met within the ring-fence budget. They are, I accept, significant increases, but they do reflect the actual budget as is in terms of both income and expenditure. The reason for the higher costs within the city centre is because more inspections need to be done of those premises, and you will be aware as well, though they're not including these fees and charges costs, that our enforcement of the city centre has resulted in 3 prosecutions over the last 3 years related to illegal street trading, and that was a first for the city. So I would ask that you consider the proposed fees within Appendix 1.
Any queries on this? Councillor Pritchard?
So, yeah, I mean, my reaction was that is quite a steep increase, particularly in Appendix 1 on page 5. So I suppose my question is that definitely a realistic increase in cost? Because it does seem quite an increase, and that might disincentivize and punish a small business or small trader who's trying to shut. I mean, obviously you don't want to be in a situation where you put them up so much that then we lose street traders, naturally lose the income full stop. And then the other one was more a kind of wording query. It says increasing fees is based on 20 to 2021 finalised accounts in 3.3. but then in 4.1, it says 21 to 22. So which is it? And if it is 20 to 21 that's based on, wasn't that massively disrupted by COVID? And so is that maybe not a less accurate year to use as a kind of baseline?
Thank you. Through you, Chair.
Yeah, I accept that the increase in costs is quite significant. Hopefully, it will not put off street traders that we have operating, certainly the ones that we have operating at the moment. The biggest cost increase in actual monetary terms is within the city centre licence itself. And as we can see, as we walk through the city centre, we have a thriving street trade, consented street trading operators operating there. In terms of the fees, it's not if you like, the costs haven't increased. It's a reflection on both year 2020, 21 and a reflection on year 21, 22 in terms of the ring fence budgets and where the deficit is. So there's a deficit of £32,000 from both over both of those years. I think that's where the confusion has arisen. It's not from one particular year, it's from both of those years. And that has then been put into the calculations for 23, 24 going forward. So it seeks to recover the deficit that has been built up.
I mean, obviously, it's seeking to do that in one go, isn't it?
Yeah.
Presumably, we could stagger it. We could say, well,
Yeah, if committee were minded to ask for the report to be brought back with a 3-year stagger of the deficit, we could do that if that's
or we could presumably we could split these figures over 2 years, which would reduce the annual increase.
Yeah, which you could smooth the effect of the deficit if committee was minded to do so.
Could you bring me a plan?
Yeah, okay.
This is an area that is going to be contentious. It is quite a large increase.
Yeah.
We need to look at the maths and the calculations behind this. We all understand the budgetary constraints and the difficulties. But for a street trader to face with that height, we need to know exactly what it is behind it. And the way we have paid for this, is this paid in one lump sum, or is there any mechanism where a trader can say, well, can I split it into 3 payments, or is that just going to cause extra admin for everybody?
The process is to pay it in one lump sum.
Yeah, that's what I suspected that for a lot of people, that is a significant sum to pay all at once. Whether any consideration has been given to maybe every back quarter or whatever, or whether that just creates an unwieldy, cumbersome administration burden.
You could if you could agree over 3 years, I've got to think of 3 years.
We can immediately address this by simply adopting the principle that we'll bring in these increases over 3 years.
Yeah.
That would do it. It would mean that the officers could then proceed with the new structure, and we'd have dealt with we'd have reduced the increases, obviously, but we'd be able to get the budget on track over a 3-year period. That's perfectly doable, but it'd be better to do that now rather than bring the report back, because the system needs to keep functioning on the basis of bringing the income. Councillor Knowles?
Sorry, does that mean then 10% each year?
Yes, through you, Chair. So I have got figures to hand if it was over 3 years. So if it was over 3 years, the majority of the fees would go up approximately 17%, and the city centre one would go up 22%.
Over 3 years, 22% a year? No, it would result in a final end increase of 22%.
If we could just agree that we go over 3 years, the finances.
But it will reduce the increase to closer to inflation. So, it does seem fairer to do it that way. Councillor Pritchard.
Just, I suppose, I think that's probably a sensible way of going forward, and certainly it's better than the picture that was there before. Just to check, though, I suppose playing what if a little bit. What if then costs increase again? in future years that the council hasn't yet budgeted for, and then that results in years 2 and 3 having a then greater increase again further on, if that makes sense. So I suppose, is this, I suppose, or is there a chance that there would have to have been a further increase even with this steep increase this year that hasn't been accounted for in the kind of proposal to go over 3 years?
Of course, there is always the risk because we're basing it on actual figures. So, it's the budgetary close down. We use those figures to enable us to be able to set the fees. And that's what's caused, if you like, the deficit, because our original fee setting back in 2020-21, we used predicted figures. And as the years continue, then we have more actual figures to base it on. So if the actual figures, be they go up or down, will influence the calculation of the fees and charges, because as you know, it's a ring-fence budget and no profit is made from it. So there is that risk, but over 3 years will enable that smoothing effect in any event.
So if you're happy, colleagues, oh, sorry.
No, I was just nodding green.
Councillor Cooner, sorry.
A little bit worried about a green increase over 3 years. As Councillor Pritchard said, how do we know that there's not going to be another increase in like another 3 years? And whilst we might have deficit, at the end of the day, everyone's struggling, businesses are struggling, citizens are struggling, and it puts this extra pressure on. I suppose it seems really unfair, and I think I would be happier to hold on it and ask for figures to come back so we can get a better understanding of how we've come to that amount, rather than agreeing it without having that information.
Through you, Chair, the proposal we would be seeking to implement would only be the increase for 23-24. So we wouldn't be suggesting what the fees would be for the further 2 years. We were merely saying we'd be taking that proportion of the deficit into the next 2 years for the calculation, as opposed to proposing a 3 year, the fees over a 3 year period. The only proposal is for 23-24, and we would take the deficit amount, which is £32,000, and smooth that over 3 years. So the proposal you would be agreeing to would merely be the 23-24 element of the proposal.
So that implies that the committee wouldn't be asked over the next 2 years to revisit the issue unless of some catastrophic context, financial loss. Yeah, okay.
We would bring the further years to committee.
Right, okay. But we're setting this budget for 3 years, effectively, setting this increase for 3 years. That's the proposal.
Through you, Chair, no, we wouldn't be setting it for 3 years. We would be setting it for 23-24, but taking the deficit over the 3 year period so that the 23-24 fees would only be based on approximately £10,000.
Okay.
So does that go on the basis that we're predicting that if there's not further increases and we resolve the deficit, these might go down in year 4? Or not? By the answer, there's further increases. Sorry.
The fees, because they're based on the actual close down of accounts, can go up as well as down. But that's why the deficit will be carried forward. If extra income is made, that will offset the deficit. So there could be fluctuations in year 2 or 3, which is why we would bring the fees back to you for 24-25 and 25-26. So what we're proposing is that the fee for 23-24 is based on a third of the current deficit, and the current deficit is £32,000. So it would be based on about £10,000 of that.
I think the issue is, what would the people paying this experience each of the next 3 years? Will they simply face a 10% increase, which is smoothing the 30% increase for this year, which was proposed across 3 years?
It may be that it's not a straight 10% increase because it's based upon all expenditure and not just the deficit in and of itself. So, you know, all premises costs, salary costs are part of the calculation. So it may not be a straight 10% increase as opposed to a 30% increase. I mean, the alternative is that we hold another committee.
Yeah,
Because
we could
that's
do
the
that.
alternative.
Sorry, Councillor Knowles and then Councillor Pritchard.
Just get my head around it. What we're saying is if we do it over 3 years, then next year they may get the increase from this year plus another increase for the following year, for the next year. Yeah, so it may go even more. And my other question was, how many are we at capacity for the number of spaces let out? You know, so could you reduce that deficit by having more street cleaners?
Through you, Chair. The amount of the fee always fluctuates because it's on quite a complex calculation of expenditure versus income, and taking into account increases in council employee salary costs and travelling costs and all sorts of other premises costs are all part of the calculation into the fee. So there is always room for fluctuation. In terms of are we at capacity, we don't have a set number of street traders that we will permit. We just allow anyone to apply for a consent, and we look at what that consent application holds and whether it's appropriate in the location that the street consent holder applicant is proposing. So yes, we can have greater income by more people applying. Equally, if less enforcement may be required for illegal street trading, that could bring costs down, etc. So there are all different elements within the fee calculation. I think given the concerns that we have, it may be appropriate for us to hopefully bring forward another meeting.
Yeah, we'd have to have another meeting too. So what's the timetable? We can't wait for the next ordinary meeting then, in-person meeting.
No, the reason we can't wait for that is because people apply for their April the 1st consent.
I see, yeah.
On the 1st of April, prior to the 1st of April every year, and therefore we need to clarify with them what their fee would be.
I'll try and sum up in a minute, but Councillor Pritchard.
This may help, Chair, it may not. So just for my own clarity, and hopefully for everybody else's, there are basically two options so far. One is whack all the increase of all the deficit, all that 30,000 in 1 year. Hopefully there isn't too much more in any of the other years, but there may be some in terms of the fluctuations that you outlined. And the other option is to split that deficit, assuming it doesn't change too much, and pay the equivalent of a third of that deficit in this year in increases. Yeah, that's the other option. And again, there may be further increases depending on the fluctuations, as well as the effectively budgeted increases that you outlined. Is that basically what you're suggesting in summary?
Well, those I think are the options, and of course the committee each year will still be free to look at whether it increases the fee if you come back and say, well, we've had these additional costs. So although the 10% is there, if we agreed the 3 year, we need to put on 2%. We could say no to that, or we could say yes. So that decision is still with us. So I think, colleagues, I'll propose from the chair the option 2, which has just been described, which is to split the deficit, the current deficit, over 3 years. So effectively, the fee is a guaranteed average 10% over the next 3 years, but the fee issue will still come back to the committee in each of the next 3 years for a further decision by the committee, based on the actual costs of the service.
So just again to clarify, you're saying now we make that decision now without any figures, as opposed to trying to turn the February meeting from the informal into a formal meeting?
Well, I mean, we can do that, but I think we need to get the figures agreed because of the timetable. It'd still be possible, as I say, for the committee to intervene when we have more information next year, this time next year. But effectively, you have the figures before you in terms of the current deficit. We can only act on those figures. We don't know what the future will bring. So if you want to assist the traders by reducing the increase over so it goes over 3 years rather than 1 year, then effectively we'd be splitting the deficit over 3 years, and there'd be an average 10% increase over the 3 years, subject to the local conditions the directors indicated. So can I move the option that we split the increase over 3 years? Is that agreed? But we come back obviously next year in the usual way, and you'll be able to make a decision then on the facts. I'm moving that. So can I see those in favour of that? Anybody against? No? Okay, we've made a decision now.
Having us to base information on what you're basing the increase on. If nothing that you can about using the question.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yes, sir.
And I think if there's a likelihood of a second option, like we've discussed today, it probably would be helpful to have the figures for that second option.
Yeah.
If we, and I realise in saying that, Chair, that's again more work for officers, and I totally accept that. Just it's always helpful to be able to have the figures in front when you're kind of making these choices.
Yeah. No, I accept that. We'll do that. We'll make sure you've got fuller figures when we deal with this again next year. But if we've agreed the principle as we have for the 3 years, that will cushion the effect of this particular deficit, which is the intention of the committee. Okay. Is that clear then? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Colin. Item 7 is this new legislation on promotion products high in fat, sugar or salt. Nick Lowe, I think, is presenting this. Oh, sorry.
Unfortunately, Nick would like to.
Right, sorry.
So sorry. So this is Becky Cameron, Chair. She's one of our reactors.
Okay, thank you very much.
Check the slide presentation screen. The presentation's on the Food Promotion and Placement in England Regulations 2021. So there was growing concern about the impact of promotional offers on influencing changing food preferences towards less healthy products. Evidence shows that the promotions are effective at influencing purchasers, and that those promotions tend to be heavily skewed towards less healthy options. Volume price promotions lead us to buy almost 20% more of a product than we otherwise would. And those location promotions often have even more power over power from children to purchase. The latest, as I just said, the latest data shows we buy almost 20% more of the product as a result of these direct promotions. And these products aren't necessarily stockpiled to kind of consume over a long period of time. They just increase consumption. And evidence also shows that the volume promotion could create a sales uplift compared to other types of simple price reductions. So the shopping environment can significantly affect what we purchase as consumers, and simple factors such as the location of products significantly affects what we buy. End of aisle displays can increase sales of things like soft drinks by up to 50%, and children are uniquely vulnerable to these sales and promotion techniques, and which can add on to what parents purchase as a result of children's preferences during a shopping trip. So the purpose of the legislation was to provide restrictions around promotions and placements in retail stores and on retail stores, online equivalents of food and drinks which are high in fat, salts and sugars and categorised as less healthy.
and to restrict the promotion of these products by volume and price, so buy one get one free, 50% off, and to restrict the advertising of these less healthy products as well. So the restrictions that we have is that the volume price restrictions will prohibit retailers from offering products such as buy one get one free, 3 for 2 on these HFSS products, which is the high fat, salts and sugars. The regulations also prohibit the offering of free refills on the less healthy drinks that fall into that category. And location restrictions in large retailers such as store entrances, the end of aisles and around checkouts. And also that this will affect the online equivalent. So an online shopping platform for a supermarket also has restrictions on these types of foods. We have some that was implemented in October 2022, which is the location restrictions around the entrances, end of aisles, checkout points, and the multi-buy offers are looking to be implemented at the moment, October 23. So the foods that this covers are things that are specified foods, and they are foods which are considered to be less healthy and foods that are not for charity food sales. So what's being used to decide if a food is considered to be less healthy is the nutritional profiling. So this uses a score to calculate if a food is considered to be less healthy, and a score for a drink of 4 or more is considered to be less healthy. And the nutritional profiling guidance, which has been published by the Secretary of State in 14th January 2011, talks about the nutritional profiling model. So just to give you a little overview of the nutritional profiling model, based on 100 grams of food or drink, you award points for A, nutrients, energy, saturated fats, total sugars and sodium, and award points for C, nutrients, fruits, vegetables, nut contents, fibre and protein. And then these two are used to calculate the score. So less healthy is above 4 for food or above 1. It's above 4 for food or above 1 for drink. So the qualifying businesses for these regulations are businesses that offer any pre-packed food for sale that have 50 or more employees and are not a care home, educational institute or restaurant. And then we have the location related restrictions, which are applicable to a business with a floor area of over 2,000 square foot. But that excludes areas in that calculation which are not used for the displaying or service of customers and the displaying of goods. So things like back of store, offices, toilet areas, that's not included in the calculation of the square footage. Nor is areas used mainly for preparation of service of goods for immediate consumption. So if a large retailer's got a cafe area, that's excluded as well, as are concessions. But this does include areas behind the counters. And the regulations don't apply to stores which sell only sell a single food from a single category. So if you had a sweet shop, confectioner, the regulations don't apply if that's all they sell. So the location restrictions are around a number of key areas, which I briefly mentioned at the beginning. So the specified food must not be placed within 2 metres of a checkout facility, unless the specified food is in a main aisle, but not on the end of the main aisle. Within 2 metres of a designated queuing area, again, unless the specified food is within a main aisle, but not at the end. in a display at the end of an aisle, where this main aisle is adjacent to a main customer route through a store, or on a separate structure which is within 50 centimetres of such an island. So baskets can't be placed directly in front of the island in the main customer flow area. And then there's also a prohibited distance from the midpoint of any public entrance into the store, and the size of that varies depending on the square footage of the store in question. Also in external covered areas, there's an entrance to the store that's kind of on the front of it, that's included. The volume, price, promotion restrictions. So a qualifying person must not offer specified food for sale as part of a volume price promotion, whether this is in store or on an online marketplace. And by volume price promotion, we cover things like multi-buys, promotions, financial incentive to buy more than one multiple items, 3 for 2s, 3 for £10, things like that. A promotion which indicates that you're getting more for free, and also no incentives around loyalty points from in a store. For example, if you buy a number of HFSS products. So buy one get one free is prohibited. But there are other examples of promotions of buying kind of multiple items which are not included. And then we've got the free refills element of the regulations, which applies to restaurants. So qualifying person must not offer a free refill promotion on a drink which the regulations apply to, which is not prepackaged and falls within Schedule 1 of the soft drinks, and is considered to be less healthy by the scoring in accordance with the nutritional profiling and technical guidance. The other exemption is not for charity food sales. So the enforcement is via an improvement notice, and that would be that the authority has grounds for believing a failure to comply, and the specific matters which constitute the person's failure to comply. They specify the measures which must be taken in order to obstruct compliance within such a period which may be specified in the notice. Failure to comply is an offence and can be prosecuted or fixed monetary penalty. That's the end of the slideshow. Have any questions?
Thank you very much. Any points? Yes, Councillor Forsyth.
I just raise one point, and this may just be me being doubting as a lawyer. 4.5, charities are excluded. We have a lot of food pantries in this city. They are not charities. Now, they are buying in clubs for people who desperately need food at a low price, but they're in very small locations. Are they going to fall foul of these regulations? Or is that something that needs to be looked at and worked on?
There is some more details specifically in the regulations about that the money is as for the charity. So we can, if that's something that we see to be a problem, we could look at those. That the detail within the regulations of the composer.
Thank you. So there are a lot of the food pantries are set up as community organisations. They're not formally charities.
Yeah.
We certainly would want to stop any of their work throughout the city. Certainly not in Queens.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. Councillor Donaldson.
Chair, thank you. Some of these regulations are quite difficult to implement, especially for smaller shopkeepers. Will there be support implementing and advice to the smaller shopkeepers to implement these?
Yeah, in terms of the size and the scale of the business that's included, the business will need to have more than, for the placement, for example, of where they can put the food, more than 50 employees and more than 2,000 square foot. So the majority of those will come under larger retail chains. I don't think at the moment we have any referred through with reference to problems with the regulation.
The other thing that's happening is a lot of the large retailers are already quite implemented now. I think you're also advising that they need to avoid it. So if you,
Yeah. So just as a kind of side effect of this regulation, is what we're finding is that a lot of large retailers, manufacturers of foods, are already changing their foods so that there is less salt, less sugar, so they're not captured by these regulations. And I think around retail groups, there's been a lot of communication to smaller retailers and franchisees, for example, about what products, which parts of the regulations apply to them, and those changes are coming through as well. That products are being altered to not get captured by the restrictions.
Councillor Coonan.
And I know a lot of the supermarkets do have labels on things which have lots of green, amber and red rating of these, which is useful. But one thing I was shopping yesterday and I was having a look at some of the labels, and he was saying what the content, like for example, sugar contents were, but then you had to like really look carefully because the size of the carton was like somewhere away from where the information about the nutritional information was. So you had to really look at it. So it would be really useful to have something to say that this pack contains and what it, so it's clearer for people. Otherwise, if you don't read it carefully, you might think that, for example, if it's 250 millilitre, I don't know, carton something, and the information is for 100 millilitres, that's what that full carton is. So it might be useful to have, if we are able to do anything on that, to make it clearer in terms of what that particular pack size is and what the nutritional information of that pack size is, rather than just going on 100 millilitres, which is what a lot of them do, don't they?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all right, no, go on.
So the regulations that have been introduced, they seek to kind of assist in a way by removing those types of products from the islands. But the actual nutritional labelling and the legal kind of description of how that should be is in separate regulations than this one itself.
Well, labelling is important, I know, but you've also got to think of people who, vision is impaired, and sometimes it's so small, it's hard for. We've got normal thought to read it. It's got to be, clear enough, as if you're blind or disabled or anything like that. It could be. That's important.
It's statutory, the labelling regulations, so that the companies are complying with that statutory side. And it's very difficult for individual local authorities to influence it.
Yeah. The government thing, really.
Councillor Donaldson, then Councillor Pritchard.
Going to free refill regulation, it says must not offer free refill. That doesn't state what the size of the initial drink is, so that could be. There's no measures.
Okay, Councillor Pritchard.
So yeah, and I note in the report that as usual, there are no extra resources to help enforce this. So I suppose as this is a new set of regulations that force the council to enforce, what's the plan in terms of enforcing how? The report details being kind of pragmatic and talking about compliance rather than non-compliance, but there will possibly come to a point where you try being nice and it doesn't work, and even doing the education piece requires resource as well. So what has much thought been given? I know not all the regulations are in yet to how the council will enforce this and fulfil its duties on it.
Yeah, part of the purpose of bringing the reports committee is for that very fact. There is no resources coming through with it. The good news, though, is that the local authorities do work with the large businesses in primary authority type arrangements, and we give advice and assured advice. And some of this is actually an action through that assured advice, so businesses themselves are actually asking authorities. They do transposed across the country where they obviously supply to the whole country, not just to them. So in part, we're hoping that a lot of it will be done there. excuse me, once it's in place, we'll select some of the smaller or the large but individual retailers of units for this, and then it will just be down to demand. But at the moment, it is part of the food inspection programme. It is legislation that we have to consider. If we get very big non-compliances, then we'll have to come back to committee to report those. But I'm hoping that the majority will see that. There has been a really good public health effect of this legislation, which was a bit of a surprise, and that's probably so the fact that they're changing ingredients so that they can continue to have those cereals and the energy vials is a really positive thing. We haven't really seen that. But that's a real positive.
That's the key impact, I think, isn't it, really? Because if manufacturers will respond and reduce the it at source, then that helps everybody with dealing with salt and fat and so on, doesn't it? Okay, colleagues. Well, I'd like to thank Becky for a very clear presentation. Thank you very much for that. And you did the thing that all the local authority officers should do at committee meetings, is you didn't go on too long, which was great. It was just right. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, can we note the report? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we're on to another report for noting, which is the Community Safety Team City Centre Public Space Protection Order Report. I think Pam Powis is online to talk to us.
I am, Chair. Can
Hello?
I send my can I send my apologies first, Chair, for not being in person? I'm unwell at the moment and I didn't want to bring my cold into the room, so apologies for that, for not being there in person. And apologies for the occasional cough. So hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to read the report, but if I just summarise, what I provided in the report is a little bit of background in relation to the reasons we went for the PSPO for the city centre and the process that we used. We went out to consultation, which concluded in December 2021. At that point of consultation, we had received 751 responses. 82.4% of those were positive for the PSPO. So we took the necessary steps to move forward to introduce the Public Space Protection Order, which then came into effect on the 25th of January 2022. The conditions that are set out in the Public Space Protection Order relates to groups gathering who are likely to cause alarm and distress or antisocial behaviour. Restriction on intoxicating substances, restrictions on alcohol, and also graffiti. Apologies. As we speak today, when I did the report, we had at that point received 61 breaches. As of today, that stands at 81 breaches. The main reason for the breaches are focused and in order. We activate breaches more to do with alcohol-related issues. Secondly, it's focused around intoxicating substances. And then antisocial behaviour. To date, we haven't had to issue any breaches related to graffiti. The process that we have for breaching the PSPO is in conjunction and partnership with West Midlands Police. So they do most of our breaches, but we do currently have 6 officers in the city centre, although 4 of those officers are only till March of this year, and then we're back to our normal 2 officers for the city centre. So we do a mixture of the breaching process between ourselves and West Midlands Police. At the moment, we're working with West Midlands Police, who have produced and developed an app for the breach process. So it's a mixture of issuing the order on site in a paper form, but also via the app. Our breach process is included in the report, and also the conditions of the PSPO are included in the report. And unless I'm happy to take any questions, but I've summarised the report. But I'm happy to take any questions in relation to it. Apologies.
Thank you, Pam. If you were here in person, I'd offer you a fisherman's friend, which I rely on. So sorry to hear you suffering, but thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any questions then? This is just to provide background really to the PSPO process. As you know, colleagues, we have discussed here the need, as certainly as I know the committee feels, for more PSPOs, but dealing with the problem of begging at junctions at major road junctions. That's the interest of the committee, really, Pam. I think I'm right in saying that. But let me bring in Councillor Knowles.
Yes, so there's been recent reports in the press about the amount of crime and antisocial behaviour reported, especially in the city centre, which I think is one of the hotspots. And I wondered if, since the PSPO has been introduced, has there been any sort of measurement? Has there been any reduction in that? What difference has it made? And my second question is that we're still waiting for our PSPO in Moseley and King's Heath, and I'm wondering when that's where that is and when it's going to be released for consultation.
Pam, are you able to answer those questions?
Yeah, I'll hopefully answer the first one. I missed some of it, but I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, the question was being asked about the increase in ASB and has the PSPO had an effect? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the PSPO has been in place for 12 months, and we are doing a report at the moment, actually, because all PSPOs came into effect and we started using them in 2015. So we are conducting a report and looking back at all the PSPOs that we've used across the city over that time period to actually identify whether they do have an impact or not. Some local authorities don't use them, other local authorities use them quite a lot. So that report will be ready within this financial year, and we'll be doing some testing around revisiting localities where we've had PSPOs to see the before and after effect. What I can say is when we introduce a public space protection order in any location and the signage goes up, we do see a reduction of approximately between 20 to 30% reduction in ASB. So we do see that immediate effect, and we do see then further reductions as we start issuing warning letters. I'll have to come back to committee in relation to the impact on this particular PSPO for the city centre. With it being in place for 12 months, we would have to go back and check that data to see exactly how it sits at the moment. But I'm happy to bring that back, Chair, if that's okay. With regards to Moseley and King's Heath, again, I'll check that. I know my manager who works in that area, Oliver Humbridge, has been working on that PSPO, and he's been in lots of conversations with West Midlands Police to try and sign off that profile. So again, Chair, if I can bring that back and give an update, I'll find out where we are with that and make sure it's pushed forward.
And where is your report taking the overall view of the PSPOs going? Is that going to Cabinet, or is? We'll have that discussion with the Cabinet member, Councillor Cotton.
Okay. At the moment, it's a piece of work I just want to do within the team because I want to know the impact of the PSPOs from my team's point of view. There's no point us keep issuing these orders if they're not actually having a full impact. So I've had officers within the team do that report because I want it, basically. So, but I'm happy to share it once it's produced with whoever requests it. It's not a problem.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Cooner.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's really good that we're doing this, that there are issues here. I just want to know how many officers do we have within the council that actually look at the enforcement of these PSPOs? And because obviously we've got a park in Hampton Wood, Horsey Pansworth, which is becoming a no-go zone, the Saddle Recreation Ground, because of antisocial behaviour. And it would be good to know how do we start the process in terms of getting officers to look into that, because we have reported it to the police. They're doing that alcohol restricted zone, but there was very different no consultation actually with the councillors in terms of the area that covered. So how do we tie in alcohol restricted zones and PSPOs, and how do we ensure the enforcement happens as well?
Okay. Well, alcohol restriction zones are PSPOs now. So the old licensing alcohol restrictions don't exist anymore and haven't existed since 2014. So if anybody wants an area, and I apologise if I don't answer all your questions, I couldn't hear you correctly. So if we want to introduce an alcohol restricted area, it has to be a public space protection order. That's the order that we must use for that. With regards to enforcing it, we have an agreement in place that West Midlands Police will enforce community safety PSPOs, but we also can enforce it in-house. But I only have 6 officers that cover the whole city in relation to within my team, and then we have a few intervention officers that are out on the patch as well, but that's a totality again of 5 intervention officers. So that's part of the reason we work in partnership with West Midlands Police. So whenever we look at a public space protection order, one of the first things we do is speak to colleagues within that neighbourhood in West Midlands Police to determine whether they've got the resources and they can indeed enforce it, because there's no point as pushing forward with a PSPO if we haven't got the resources to enforce it. Hopefully that's covered your questions, Councillor, but I did miss some of the conversations, so apologies for that.
Yes, thank you. You did answer my question. So in terms of if someone breaks that public space protection order, PSPO, what are the penalties or the fixed penalty notices that we issue? And what's the process that follows with that? It would be good to get an understanding of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have included in this report a copy of our breach process. So hopefully if there's any questions around that, I'm happy to take those. What we do look at is we look at the circumstances when someone breaches a public space protection order, and if it's appropriate at the point of us making a decision to issue an FPN, then we will issue an FPN. But we tend to, at the first breach, we have conversations, we have seek advice with them, we signpost them, and we advise them to go serve, especially if it's around the intoxicating substances and alcohol, because normally the people we're dealing with come with some complex needs. So we'll make that decision at the time. It's always a warning letter first, and then on the second breach, we'll make the decision on whether we're going to issue the FPN or whether we want to take some further outreach work, or we want to work with that person a little bit more. If they carry on breaching, we can, if we decide not to issue the FPN, we can breach them into court on the PSPO breach, and depending on the decision of the court, they can be prosecuted and be fined up to £1,000, and other punishment could be put on that. So they could have positive requirements added on that as well. So we do look at each one based on their own merit and determine the right avenue to take based on that person's circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Do we name and shame as well? Does that actually inherit the particular areas where we've prosecuted? Do we name and shame and put some notice up to say that there has been a prosecution? Because obviously that acts as a deterrent in itself.
Yeah, it's not so much name and shame, depending on if we went into the court process, which we haven't had to do at this time. Once they go into the court process, then they are a bit more public. So it's not standard process for us to issue a name and shame when it's an FPN. And again, we have to look at the individuals, because a lot of the individuals that we do deal with when it comes to public space protection order, because it is an order that's in a geographical area, they have got complex needs, so we have to do be cautious around what we do there. What we have been really bad at in the past within community safety is telling people all the work we do, because we do an awful lot of work in community safety, but we don't advertise it a lot. We just sort of get on with it. So we have got some plans in place in relation to putting more comms out around, not just around public space protection orders and how many we're doing and what the impact is on the other work that we're doing within community safety also.
And of course, colleagues, you've got fellow councillors on the local community safety partnership, which covers your constituency area, so you can raise these issues via that as well. Councillor Knowles?
Sorry, I'm asking another question.
No.
I was just interested in the graffiti element, because that's something. I have a group who actually go and clean graffiti almost weekly, and it's such a blight, and it's all over the city. And yet we haven't had any warnings. How do you try and enforce that part of the PSPO?
We enforce it exactly the same way as we enforce any other part of the PSPO. So if colleagues witness, so it was West Midlands Police or officers within my team, witness anyone that is actually carrying the equipment or committing graffiti, then we'll breach them. We just haven't had, or we haven't witnessed anyone doing that, so we haven't had the opportunity to use this PSPO to breach anyone for graffiti. It doesn't mean we're not doing other work around graffiti, but ultimately within community safety, graffiti is dealt with within waste management, the removal and the enforcement, but we do support colleagues in relation to any work with regards to tag-ins and identifying any individuals, and we'll support and help them along those pieces of work as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of work could be done with businesses and the business improvement districts in identifying them through CCTV, and then taking it forward.
If I may, this has been an interest of mine, which I've been discussing with Councillor Cotton for a while. And my concern is that the police have a very laid back attitude to prosecution and to investigation here, in that because they feel they're unlikely that the cases of graffiti are unlikely to be treated that seriously by the courts, and there's a reluctance to prosecute. The police are not really geared up to investigate, because in my experience in my ward, the graffiti appears at night. It's not, you're not going to see people like you see people dropping litter and give an FPN. Really, we need the police to be more active, proactive on this issue, identify the taggers, and to get some arrests and get some prosecutions. And that is the difficulty we face, because we've raised this certainly in our community safety partnership, and that's the answer we get from the police. So there's a problem there which needs addressing in terms of the police attitude.
If I may add, it's because they're very rarely reported as crimes, so they don't come onto the police radar.
Yeah. If I report graffiti, I report it as criminal damage. And I think that's the key. It is criminal damage, basically. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that. And thank you, Pam, very much for that overview. And we'd be very interested in your report when it's available, assessing the impact of the PSPOs. But thank you very much for giving your time today.
No,
okay, colleagues. We note the report. We have got a second bite of the cherry with Mark Croxford on the City Centre Noise Public Space Protection Order report, so we can pick up some issues there as well.
All right, well done.
Okay. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is regarding, again, the city centre, but it's regarding a noise issue within the city centre. I know that all councillors have noticed that the street scene has changed quite significantly in the last 10 years, with a lot more people using the street for noisy purposes, whether that be busking or some sort of activity like hanging from a bar, challenges of music being played to attract attention or to the street creatures. The other thing that's really changed, technology's changed, and there's a lot of very powerful amplification equipment out there, which means that from very small pieces of equipment, you can actually create quite a lot of noise. So back in, I think it was back 2014, 2015, we looked at whether or not a PSPO should be served because of the way the street was being used. And at the time of the public consultation, it basically came back to 60% were not in favour of any changes or controls, and conversely, 40% were in favour. So the local authority decided not to follow the route of a PSPO for the city centre. It was much more extensive. It was to encompass all of the city centre, and potentially could have covered the city centre, including from the inner ring road, and there would have been some controls. Conversely, down in London, they do have some London powers, which means that they can actually implement some licensing and permitting schemes where they can control the use of the street, and they can actually prohibit as well as approve supply on the street. What's changed in the interim, significant change in the interim, is the planning legislation change. There was a much more laid back or national planning guidance that said that we needed to use empty buildings, and one of the things that they started looking at was mixed use in town centres, and we've now got residential and quite significant quantities of residential accommodation in the city. So back in 2019, 2020, we started getting significantly more complaints. We had complaints from businesses, and we also had complaints from residents. And the residents were complaining that it was suffering from statutory nuisance, and it was being caused by people on the street using the amplification equipment. From our perspective as environmental health, yes, we lead on noise, and we need to do something. So what we did is we started monitoring the residential properties. And the two residential properties are obviously the Rotunda, but then there's a residential property above Tesco's, But there's also another residential property which we didn't know at the time, which is actually adjacent but nearer to the crossroads. There's actually two in the area where we thought there was just one. What it then turned out to be is that inside those properties, they were suffering from a statutory noise nuisance. And the difficulty with, well, not the difficulty, but the way in which the legislation is laid out under the Environmental Protection Act is that if the local authority is satisfied that the nuisance exists, it shall serve a notice. It's not may, it's not you can consider it, it shall serve a notice. So now all of a sudden we're in a situation where whether it's 1, 5 or 100 people complaining, we are satisfied the nuisance is existing to those residents, we have to serve a notice. Now, if I ask you what your name is and give you your name, I can serve the notice on you as an individual and say, Mark Croxford, you can't cause a statutory nuisance. And if I do, I then commit to the offence. Okay, so not at the beginning, I'm only committing the offence that someone's doing a notice. If you refuse to give me your details, they can serve on your property and say the owner of the property is prohibited from causing a nuisance, or the occupiers of the concern are prohibited from causing a nuisance. And if they then cause a nuisance, we can then summons them because they're committing an offence. We also can use the post powers to get the name and address of the people at the the difficulty we have here is this is on the street. So we could go to a person in the street and say, what's your name? We don't get a true name, we get a false name, or we don't get any name. How do we then prohibit it? And because they haven't committed an offence at the time, because we haven't served a notice, we're looking to serve a notice, we haven't got the powers to require the names. So we spent about a year with officers going out, talking to people, asking them to turn down the action, asking them to move from outside the residential premises. And in the first sort of 3 months, that worked reasonably well. Didn't work everywhere, but it worked reasonably well. After that 3 month period, it went the opposite way. They started turning the music up, they started turning the application up, they started being there for longer periods of time. And it just got significantly worse. There was also conflict, which I detailed in the report as well, between the people we were talking to and the officers repetitively asking them to turn it down. We then took legal advice, and the legal advice said that, yes, you've got a statutory nuisance, yes, you've got to take some action, no, the notices aren't going to work. The only thing that's left for you to consider is either a public space protection order or alternatively to take an injunction, which is another level again. So what we did is we went out to consultation on a public space protection order, and we have declared now a public space protection order to protect the residential accommodation, which is around Tesco's on New Street, and also in the squares that the rotunda backs onto the bottom of New Street. And at the very back of the report, at the end of the report, there is a map that is shown there. Now, to be reasonable, and as reasonable as we could be, what we've done is we've tried to identify the areas that actually cause a nuisance during the day, and also the area that causes a nuisance at night. But there's a lot of people who are against the PSPO and the buskers unions, etc., who have tried to work with and we continue to try and work with. They're very against these areas being declared because they're high footfall areas. And also, you know, busking is a vibrant thing that occurs within some cities where it's controlled or it's done at a reasonable level. But obviously busking and the use of the speakers, preaching and the heavy use of the speakers immediately outside a residential property is obviously not acceptable. So if it occurred in your road or your close, you would know immediately this isn't going to be something that is going to be acceptable. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to limit the areas that are near to, during the day, the residential, but we've had to go for a much wider zone later on at night. So in the plans at the back of the report, you can see a green area, which is basically 8 in the morning to 8 at night. And then you've got a yellow area, which you can see between 8 at night through to the morning. So in the green area, nobody can play at all at any time of the day. And in the yellow area, you can play during the day, but not during the night. So we tried to be as reasonable as we possibly could. Not everybody considers that it is reasonable. But the greatest difficulty that we have is the statutory is still occurring. So I've detailed the complaints that we've had, the interactions, and there's a table here of all the people that we've asked to move or tried to move or had to speak to since August running through to almost now. So it goes through to the end of the beginning of December. What we've got at the moment is we've still got buskers and preachers going into those areas and using our application. We're still asking them to move. We've started to try and issue tickets. We don't want to be in a situation with a PSPO, if you play in that area or you use a loudspeaker in that area, you automatically commit the offence, and we can take that offence to court and we can issue it. Yeah. The downside of the statute of nuisance is we have to go into the property to determine the noise levels in the property. And what we don't want to have to do is go into the person's property on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because we have rotating buskers or rotating creatures outside to determine the levels. That's just not reasonable. So the situation we're at the moment is we have declared a PSPO. We are trying to tackle the work with people around that PSPO. But while we're still getting complaints from residents, particularly, and where we're doing some monitoring to determine there's still a statute of nuisance, we're going to have to continue. But if we don't actually make a difference, and a lot of residents are saying, we move person A on the person B comes, we move person B on the person C comes, they get no relief. We are getting into a situation that we can't keep throwing more and more officers resource at it. We're having to pay for off-duty police officers to come onto duty and actually accompany our enforcement officers violence on the street and attacks on the street. We are getting to a situation that we may have to escalate to an injunction. So we're trying to work with people to get a better way of doing this. We're trying to see whether the music union and the other Ipswich Live, the other representatives of buskers will actually bring in some form of self-management. We are considering whether we can actually develop a PSPO into a licensing scheme where we actually give permission for people to come onto the street and actually use that. Whether that's acceptable, I'm not too sure, but it's something we're still exploring. But equally at the same time, we are having to represent the residents who are suffering from this nuisance. And if it does continue, we may have to go further with the proposal that we have. So, Chair, that's accounted through the difficulties that we've been experiencing on the streets in the city and the response that your officers are giving to it at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think you've set out what we've been doing. Presumably, we could seek a change in the law. Right? It takes ages, but presumably that would be an issue, wouldn't it? Legislative change.
So, yes, Chair, the director's come up with a proposal. We are going to speak to government, to write to government, asking to see whether or not we could have the Control of Pollution Act change. So the Control of Pollution Act is 1974 and prohibits the use of a loudspeaker in the street after 9 p.m. before I think it's 7 a.m. or potentially 8 a.m. It excludes things like public announcements, the electricity's off, the water's off, there's a gas leak. But basically, it prohibits the use of speakers. And the proposal is that we actually write to government to see whether we could have an all-encompassing ban, because we're not the only city that has difficulties around this, and that we would then license people at a certain level and certain places to play. At the moment, that's almost equivalent to what we've done with PSPO. It would cover a wider area, but there are a lot of people who use the street who aren't happy with PSPO. But equally, there are a lot of people in the residential, and it is quite a sizable number of people in residential who are actually affected by that noise.
Okay, Councillor Knowles.
Is there a limit, Mark, on the volume? Could you not have a thing about the volume of the equipment that they use?
It's really quite scientific, the noise. It's not about the volume, it's the difference in volume to the volume and the background. So in the city centre, if you and I went out and had a conversation, we'd actually be shouting at each other. So if we went into the library and had the same conversation, it'd be acceptable on the street, but in the library, we'd be looking at each other. But it would appear to be the same volume to us in the patients. So one of the difficulties is just saying it can't be more than 60 dBA doesn't mean anything, because if background noise is 70 or 80 dBA, you won't be able to hear the original. So that in part bans it. The other thing is that the city is a canyon, so you've got large, tall buildings. And what's happening is the noise, instead of going left in sort of a hemisphere and dissipating, what it's doing is bouncing, and it's bouncing and going through. And part of the construction means that they've tried to silence inside the building, so the buildings are quiet, so the low frequency is going through that, and it's becoming very apparent. So that's also having an impact. But to give you an idea, one of the enforcement officers, he was dealing with a band which had percussion instruments. That was in High Street, so on the corner of New Street and High Street. you could hear them at the law courts. So it's that noise is gone.
Well, it's the amplification that's the problem, isn't it? The amplification is the problem, essentially. I mean, historically, of course, street traders or buskers didn't have that option. And so presumably the noise was controllable, though I'm sure there was some degree of nuisance. So that's the issue. Councillor Pritchard.
I mean, my question was similar, and you've, I suppose, kind of answered it in response to Councillor Knowles. But I mean, I suppose I'll follow up by saying, is there no way of doing a sort of measurement approach of something in that way? Because absolutely, the noise, if it's residential, is not on. But equally, it'll be a shame to lose everything from the city centre. So it's kind of, is there any sort of measurement approach that can be taken at all, bearing in mind what you just said about the environment, the surrounding environment? And just for clarity, you said about the rotunda. The rotunda's had residential in it since the early noughties, as far as I'm aware. So that's not a kind of new development in the sense that you said, things have changed. The city centre is now more residential, but the rotunda itself, I think that was the early noughties, and that started, or mid-noughties, and that started having residential. So, and yet obviously this problem's only really been coming to the fore since the mid-10s with the kind of amplification again from the report.
Okay, so the measurement of noise, what we've been recommending to people is actually to see how far along the street you can actually hear it. So if you can hear it for more than 20 to 30 metres and it's loud at that period, you're too loud. Okay, so that's the practical way of doing the measurement. So for instance, I've seen people where I've been walking from the council house going back to Winsterhall and I've heard them from the McDonald's up the ramp. And you keep walking and walking and walking, and it's been loud and McDonald's up the ramp. It's just too loud. And it is the fact that they can buy relatively cheap or large amplifiers and put the volume on. And even when they're asked to turn it down, they don't. They go the other way. So it's exacerbated. So it needs to be self-controlled and it needs to be self-policed to a large extent. With regard to the rotunda, I can't explain why we didn't have the complaints before. They've certainly come in since we've done the consultation. We weren't overly aware of it. What we do know is that a high percentage of the units inside the rotunda are residential lets, and there's quite a churn of people in there. So if you're unsatisfied with where you're living, the chances are that you could potentially move much more rapidly. The people that own there have got certainly contacted us more than.
Okay, colleagues. Well, I think that's been a useful look at that because it has been taking a lot of resource, and clearly we need more legal solutions. But the principle is that we don't want to stop street performers or preachers and so on, clearly. But it does need to be balanced, and particularly the noise nuisance. I think we've all heard it when we've been there in the city centre. So can we note the report? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. We've got the usual prosecutions and cautions report, which gives you the information on prosecution activities. And again, you're free to raise any general issues about these or pick up some of the casework with the individual officers. Can I just add as well that, as you know, we were having a conversation about how we could identify particular prosecutions relative to wards, to our own wards. And I'm pleased to say that the leader, in conjunction with myself, will be writing to all elected members shortly with the data identified by ward. If you haven't actually had any prosecutions in your ward, it'll be explained that you won't feature, your ward won't feature. But there will obviously be quite a lot of information there which will be useful to everyone in the context of their ward position. And I understand that it'll be going out imminently, yes, pretty much today or tomorrow. So I think we've made some progress on that.
Chair, were we talking about maybe including where they've been out, the buses have been out towards haven't actually issued any enforcement notices? It would be helpful to know that they've actually been to our wards. I know this in the report again, there's an awful lot again in the city centre and not very many outer areas.
Through you, Chair. the initial cut, if you like, of the reports we'll be sending out will be based on the data that we currently hold. As we progress and get feedback, we may be able to refine those reports to start including additional information. But I know both Councillor Davies, LPPC in general, and the leader were very anxious that we start actually sharing information as soon as possible. So at the moment, our position is that the information we'll send out will be based upon the committee report. All councillors will receive the full information, and where an offence has taken place in the ward or an offender resides in the ward, that will be presented as ward information for the ward councillors. So we're as detailed as possible for taking what we can from the information we have.
Obviously, we can look to tweak that further if that's possible. But thank you for those comments. Councillor Gunnar.
Just to give it on some of my questions, but I was also mindful of the fact that a lot of these are based in the city centre and not in the outer city areas. But I just want to know, you know, we pay out for our local highways budgets, we pay for TPOs in our wards, but we never hear of any prosecutions from. So is that something that falls within your department? And would it be useful? And would be useful to have the information to see if there has been a prosecution of people parking on the TPO? So we're kind of waiting for our local highways budgets if there's no enforcement there.
No, so
We're just trying to. Did you say PPO?
PPOs.
Do you mean TRO?
TROs. Traffic regulation orders.
Yes.
No, they become under highways.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair.
I mean, we can presumably get information from highways, can't we?
Yeah. Through you, Chair, I think our current position is only the enforcement activities delegated to this committee is the information that we will be sharing, because as an officer, I'll be sharing the information on behalf of the Chair and yourselves, and the activities that delegate to these committees. This committee, obviously, we will be sharing with our colleagues in other divisions and directorates the overall request from members for a broader range of enforcement activities. So we're happy to pass that messaging on, but we are only in control, if you like, of our own delegated powers.
I think the opportunity here with the leader's letter is that deals with the information we have, as the director's indicated. But if we as members want to see other enforcement information there, such as the TRO enforcements or lack of, then we can ask that to happen through the leader's letter, because it's obviously not a one-off. It will happen again. So we need to go back and say, well, yes, that's good, but we'd like to add this particular aspect in. So thank you for the point, and I'll certainly take that back to the leader as well.
I think, for me, to be able to, if we're putting intervention in place to address issues in our local areas, it's useful to get some feedback to say, actually, as a result of, you know, we have limited time with the anyway, but as a result of this is what's happened. And then we can share it to ward committees as well. With local residents, so they know actually something is happening around enforcement. Is that we pay for TROs in various locations in our ward. I'm not aware of a single enforcement case.
Well, obviously that's not within the purview of the committee, but I take the point and I share your issue, you know, because all our wards are potentially affected. So I hope through the mechanism the leader's creating, we can perhaps get that information more into, you know, the domain we need it, and focus on highways as well as individual councillors. Okay, can we note the report? Okay, thank you very much. You've got date and time of next in-person meeting there, and I have no other business notified to me. So authority to chair and officers. So I move in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has authority to act on behalf of the committee. Is that agreed? Agreed. Colleagues, thank you very much for your attendance. That is the meeting today. Thank you.